including keeping their jobs. And the fact that we had David Friedberg on this podcast and then Sacks, chiming in shortly after, just definitively saying first principles, why wouldn't you wear a mask? What is the possible downside? And Friedberg saying, hey, I'm getting some testing equipment. We should just be doing mass testing. Friedberg, when you look at this and how when we started the podcast, I think in March or April, we were very clear as people not with the exception of yourself, not in the healthcare space in any way. Why can't they? What would be a better structure for the WHO? Or is there a better structure than just a bunch of randos like us on a podcast, very easily seeing through first principles that a 79-cent mask is a no-brainer, that getting testing, mass testing and recording it every day and doing sampling? What is the better solution here for governance or for dealing with these type of, really large problems and ones that kind of have a clock? That's the other thing about this problem is this problem came with a countdown clock. You had to make a really fast decision in order to protect yourself, and we made a really drawn-out decision. Now we're paying the price.
I mean, I think under the circumstances you outline, you need leadership, right? So you need probably a country or some entity to step forward and lead with respect to being proactive and aggressive with action, because any multinational oversight body or political body is going to be kind of molassed out. It's going to be stalled out with the processes and the competing interests, as you guys have highlighted. So the libertarian argument would be let the free market drive outcomes, and some folks will succeed and some folks will fail. If we want all of humanity to succeed, then the likely scenario is what we've seen with world wars and such, which is you need leadership. You need one organization or one entity or one national body to step forward and say, this is what we're doing, and we're going to lead. And the world was absent leadership over the last 6 months. Historically, the U.S. has filled that void, but that certainly wasn't the case this year. And so, it seems to me like you're not going to find a political governing system, multinational governing system that's going to be successful in solving these kind of existential global problems overnight. You really need someone to step forward. And the U.S. is kind of leaving a bit of a gap. This might be a good segue, because the question next is who's going to fill that gap going forward.
Yeah, so let's make that segue. When you look at the duopoly that currently is, I would say, on par now. I don't think we can say we're the superpower anymore, and that China's an up-and-coming superpower. It's pretty clear they are an equal superpower. I don't know if anybody here disagrees with that right now, but if we have an edge, it's a very minor one at this point. How do we look at health problems with an authoritarian country where individuals do not vote, and there is a God King who has recently said, I will be the God King for the rest of my life, for sure? How do we manage this relationship with China? Friedberg. And then we can pass it over to Sacks.
From a healthcare perspective?
Let's start there, for sure. And then whatever other major issue you would like to then segue into. Climate change comes to mind, trade comes to mind, human rights comes to mind.
I would imagine the argument that your geopolitical commentators would make, who are probably more experienced and experts in this than any of us, would probably relate to the degree of influence. The question of who has the most influence globally may be kind of the way that you define who has the most power globally. And so, in the current circumstance, you can look at trade balance between China and other nations. You can look at trade balance between the U.S. and other nations, and you can look at the balance sheet, the assets and the debt owed. And you're right. I mean, a lot of people are making the case that we're kind of reaching a point of parity through some metric or some set of equations here. And at this point, there's going to be a jockeying for leadership globally in terms of influence. And so that will have ramifications with respect to things that are global in nature, like global pandemics. And I think this is a really kind of key flashpoint moment for us, because we are facing that. We did face that circumstance this year, and obviously we took the raw end of the deal.
We failed most. I mean, we all concur on that. We did worst.
China is just like an extremely good example of focusing on strategy while the rest of us focused on tactics. The last 20 years have been punctuated by the United States spending literally trillions of dollars on endless wars and unnecessary military infrastructure and all kinds of wasted pork barrel spending and programs that just have resulted in zero ROI for the United States and its taxpayers and citizens. And instead, what did China do? They basically went around the world and they used the equivalent amount of dollars, and they said every war that the United States fights is a war that we can essentially be silent on. Let them do that dirty work, and what we will do instead is we will go and basically buy and own large swaths of Southeast Asia, large swaths of Africa, which is, the emerging labor pools that will drive GDP forward for us. And what they've essentially created is not necessarily a voting bloc, but a productivity bloc. And that's what's so, interesting and also really important to understand, which is that China is fighting not an ideological war. They're fighting an economic war. And it is one where they are buying, member states to join them with their capital. And so we've kind of not seen it, and it's unfortunately happened right under our nose. So now what we need to do is we need to sort of wake up to this reality and have a very aggressive point of view around what, matters. So by the way, this is also why, and I'll hand the mic to David after this, but this is also why I think we have completely wasted so much time focusing on all these other countries that just don't matter anymore. And, I don't say that emotionally. I just say it practically. Every single minute we spend on Russia is just a wasted time. This is a, country that just won't fundamentally matter in the world over the next 15 to 20 years. Large swaths of Europe, they're ideologically aligned, but they just don't matter. The United States has to develop a really specific strategic viewpoint on the fact that it is us versus China, whether we like it or not. And it starts in things like public policy, but it stretches to everything, including capitalism, technology, intellectual property, healthcare. And this war will not be fought on the ground with guns. It'll be fought with computers, and it'll be fought with money.
Yeah,
and I
loans.
think we need to